or good noon. The Thursday, June 22nd Executive Committee meeting will now come to order. We're convened as of 12 p.m. I respectfully ask everyone attending to mute yourself unless you are recognized to speak. I'll start by calling the roll. First, Vice Chair Catlin.
Here.
Second, Vice Chair Davidson. Director Davidson is not here. His work kept him from attending today. He was asked me to tell everyone how sorry he was to miss it. Secretary Sloan.
Here.
Treasurer Deschelle.
Here.
And I am Chair Lynn Geisinger. I am here. Other directors, I don't see any other directors at this point. Staff in attendance are our GM CEO, Deborah Johnson, legal counsel, Melanie Snyder. Welcome, Jack Kroll, our new board executive director in his first executive committee meeting. He and I have been talking. He's been very helpful already. Welcome. Tyshree Parrish, Jillian Knapp Rhodes, Charlene Pileggi, John McKay, Michael Davies, Brandy Hunter, I believe, make up the whole group. So we're going to open public comment to anyone who'd like to address the committee regarding any topic listed in the published meeting agenda for this meeting or for this month or the immediately preceding month. If you wish to speak and have not already done so, please either raise your virtual hand or press *9 on your phone. Ms. Parrish or whomever, is there anybody in line to speak?
Hi, Chair. I don't see any hands raised, and there were no emails received for today's committee either.
Great. Thank you. And our CFO, Doug McLeod, has joined us, I see. We are going to shift the agenda slightly. That had the June board meeting agenda review and approval in before our recommended actions. But one of the recommended actions is part of the June board meeting. So we need to address that first. So we're going to address our two recommended actions first. There are two recommended actions on the agenda this afternoon. Our first is for the state lobbying services contract amendment for the board of directors to authorize the general manager and CEO or her designee to execute an amendment to exercise the two one-year options to extend the current state lobbying services contract with Brandeberry McKenna Public Affairs, or BBMK, through July 27, 2025 for a total cost not to exceed $250,000. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, I hear Director Sloan and Deschelle as the movement and the second. I would ask Michael Davies, Government Relations Officer, to please present this item.
Thank you, Chair, members of the board. Michael Davies, Government Relations Officer. Chair, as you stated, this is authorizing the general manager or CEO to extend the current contract for state lobbying services with Brandeberry McKenna, and that would extend through July 27th, 2025, not to exceed a total cost of $250,000. RTD staff is pleased with the work that Brandeberry McKenna does on behalf of the agency and thinks they continue to do good work under the Gold Dome, building relationships for this agency and advancing our state legislative agenda. With that, I'll end my remarks and happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Davies. Are there any questions or other comments or discussion? Director Ruscia, I will note that Director Ruscia has joined us.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just have a brief question about the contract. In addition to lobbying at the Capitol, do we ever utilize our state lobbyists for things like rulemaking? Or would that potentially be, I guess what I'm just trying to understand is, in addition to legislation, are there other activities that might fall under that contract?
Mr. Davies?
Currently, there's no activities that I've engaged with them on with regards to rulemaking at the state level. Generally, their work really is focused really on the legislative session.
And I would say, and the processes that get us there, the TLRC and those things, but yeah, it's with the legislature.
That was my only question.
Okay, thank you. First Vice Chair Catlin.
I would just like to comment that they were represented, or they were at the event today, and it's really clear that they have strong relationships all over the state, but also even with local elected officials. And I think that they are very, very good at helping us, not only during the session, but other times of the year. So I'm very much in support of this contract. Thank you.
Great. I would second that and agree. Any other comments? All right, at this time, we will take a vote. Are there any no votes on this action? Okay, with 4 yes votes and 0 no votes and 0 abstentions, the motion passes. The second recommended action on the agenda is for establishing a queer cultural district in the city and county of Denver and declaring June 28th as annual Ride with Pride Day. It is recommended by RTD directors Rusha, Guzman, and Deschel that the Board of Directors adopt a resolution supporting both the establishment of a queer cultural district in the city and county of Denver and the declaration by the board of June 28th as annual Ride with Pride Day. So I want to take a motion here, and then I'm going to ask Director Deschel or Director Rusha to present their amendment, please. So do we have a motion to move this item forward, this recommended action to the board?
So moved.
And do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, Director, thank you. Director Deschel is the movement. Director Sloan is the second. Director Deschel or Rusha, I guess I would ask you to present this item, but also if you have an amendment first, we could entertain that.
Yes. And I believe the amendment circulated to everyone, I believe. Great. I move to amend the motion to read as circulated, not unless you'd like me to read the whole thing into the record.
No, I think we'll ultimately need the recommended action. Do you have that you could read? It should be pretty short.
Yeah, I move that the amendment is to approve resolution number blank blank series of 2023, declaring June 28th as annual Ride with Pride Day, as amended.
Okay, thank you. Do we have a second for that motion?
Second.
We have a motion to amend from Director Deschel and a second from Secretary Sloan. Director Deschel, did you want to discuss this further?
I'll yield to Director Rusha.
Okay.
Thank you, Director Deschel. I was actually just going to say, as you are a member of executive and was part of this, I'd be happy to yield to you. And I do want to note that I have a community meeting to go to in a few minutes, so I have to hop off. But so initially the resolution was crafted. Excuse me, let me start my video. This resolution was crafted and it had 2 parts. The first was stated support of the concept of a queer cultural district in the city and county of Denver, something that community groups have been advocating, whether formally or informally, for quite a while. And the second component was declaring June 28th, which is the anniversary of Stonewall, as Ride with Pride Day, and making that just an annual, I don't know if you call it an event, but essentially an annual day that we recognize at RTD. After some feedback from board members and taking a second look, we decided to remove the references to the queer cultural district, not because it's not something that we don't support, but rather it might be just too soon in that process, and might inadvertently, detract the board from some of its other initiatives. But we did feel that the Ride with Pride Day declaration and having an annual Ride with Pride Day did align with our strategic plan and our stated core values. We did some further workshopping with board members and members of the community and a few staff members just to get their feedback. The resolution essentially directs, but loosely directs staff under the guidance of our GM CEO, Ms. Deborah Johnson, to come back to the board next year with their vision for Ride with Pride Day and any other related Pride activities. I do think that staff probably has some plans next year for Pride Month, and that portion of the resolution is not intended to overstep into operations, but rather take a co-governance or, embrace our co-governance model and simply say, as a board, we have these values. We would like to demonstrate these values to the community. We think this provides a community value, but we trust our staff to come up with a plan to demonstrate that. With that, I also noted in addition to the revised language, Mr. Kroll sent out a revised memo to that effect. And I did list for edification several other transit agencies that do something similar. I found some transit agencies creating a Ride with Pride bus going back to 2014. And I think that this would be good company to join. So some of those agencies include, LA Metro, DC, Palm Beach, London, Sydney, Dublin, and so forth. I didn't list everyone I found, but I did count more than 30 over the weekend when I was doing some digging. So I think we'd be in good company, and the community would really appreciate it. I would, welcome your support, but I'm here really for questions if I can answer any.
Okay, thank you. Are there questions or comments here? Secretary Sloan. Oh, you're muted.
I just have a couple of comments. I appreciate the amendment. I think we were getting far ahead of ourselves with the previous one. And I mentioned this to Director Rusha yesterday. There is a typo that should be apprise the board from staff rather than appraise. The only other comment, and again, this is very minor, it's troubling to me that it says every year thereafter. It sounds like a perpetuity thing, and life changes. And I would prefer it just say June 28th be known as Ride with Pride Day rather than this year plus every year thereafter. But again, I'm appreciative of the work that the proposing directors did. I know it's difficult for 3 people to negotiate something like this. So I know you're very sincere about having it before the board. So thank you.
Thank you. I have a couple of comments by Mr. Kroll, and then I'm going to ask Ms. Johnson if she has any comments or concerns.
Thank you, Chair Geisinger and members of the executive committee. I just wanted to note that we too caught the typo, and there was a couple other capitalization issues. And if it's permissible from the executive committee, we would just circulate that copy. Okay, great.
Great. Ms. Johnson, do you have anything to add?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you to the committee for the opportunity to speak. And thank you, Mr. Kroll, because yes, he made reference to some of the elements as it relates to RTD style guide and the nomenclature in which we utilize. So those are the types of things. I'm supportive. I mean, I've worked at transit agencies in which we've done this. We do have wrap buses and so forth, recognizing that with our fleet, we don't have designated vehicles and things of the like from an operational nature. It's something we support collectively because we provide service to all and recognize what the intent is behind this, and would just share with the board, recognizing that we represent a very demographic and so forth. We understand the intent behind this going forward and will apprise you accordingly. Into the fact about Riding with Pride, just on June 27th, we have a watch party and we are engaged, and we will be participating in Pride next year because applications have to be submitted a year in advance. And so I see Director Rusha nodding because she's probably aware of that, but we do have plans, and I just wanted to ensure that there was an understanding as we talk about wrapping vehicles and things of the like. That takes a lot of effort, and that's why we have a wrap bus that we use collectively that showcases a myriad of different demographics. So we're open to it, and we will apprise accordingly. So thank you very much for the opportunity to offer up comments.
Great. I'm sorry, did you say June 27th, there's a launch party?
June 27th, there is a watch party as relates to the Pride Parade here in Denver, and we as an organization are participating as we have in other events culturally based.
Okay. So I think there are a couple of options here. The bylaws, thank you to Jack for reminding me of these, say that director initiated action should go to a committee before it comes here, but it doesn't require that. It also says that, as long as if they're turned in after noon yesterday, the chair has discretion whether to send it to the board. So that suggests that the chair doesn't have discretion. Regardless, I think we want to send this to the board, and it could be sending it as with the executive committee's support, or, just sending it without a statement like that. In terms of my view of this, I also am supportive of this. I think it's a great idea. I don't like announcing on June 26th or essentially June 27th that we're starting it this year, because June 28th is Bike to Work Day. And we've had a lot of our local governments and the TMAs and TMOs and DRCOG, there's a lot of energy that has gone into that. So I personally would prefer to see it set on the night of June 26th to begin next year. And I may end up making a motion to that effect. Would you oppose that, Director Rusha and Director Deschel?
If I may. So I think that given that the 28th is around the corner, I personally, I wouldn't have an expectation of our staff, to be pulling something together or pulling away from other planned activities. Perhaps there's a social media and a tweet. In some ways, I think that the for this year, it is more of a proclamation. And next year there are more actionable items, and I hope that addresses where you're coming from, Madam Chair. If I understood your concern correctly, I think we can have multiple things going on at once, or we can ride with pride, we can cycle with pride, and we can have Bike to Work Day. Our community engagement is very broad, but there was no intent to add something to staff's plate last minute or distract from anything that is currently on the calendar. And if that I hope that addresses your concern, but I wouldn't consider, I guess I'd have to see what the amendment would be or understand further before I could answer if my thoughts about it. I don't know, perhaps Director Deschel.
Yeah, I think
could answer it better.
I hear you, Director Chair Geisinger, but I think to view them as mutually exclusive is not totally fair. And I think it's, this year, again, there's not really an ask of staff to do much. It's the meaning behind the date, right? And I think, frankly, that's also on Bike to Work Day, right? For not considering the fact that, hey, there's a huge segment of our community for whom this date is really important. And this action created meaning for them and created major civil rights changes for them. And so, sure, you can say Bike to Work Day was registered first, but the flip side of that is, well, why didn't Bike to Work Day consider that date and the importance of it, right? And similarly, why can't you ride with pride to the bus to get to work? Like, I don't see them as taking away from one another, especially with the number of people who do take their bikes to the bus or do take their bikes to the train. I don't think it's material. I just think it sort of cheapens the product. It cheapens it to shift the date for the sole reason of wanting to not take anything away from Bike to Work Day, which I don't think it does.
Okay, thank you for your comments. I will consider the comments. I still feel like if everybody that we work with has put this much effort into Bike to Work Day, it we're not doing anything that adds value by doing that, but it's just a differing opinion. So Director Catlin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I actually thought about the Bike to Work Day coincidence, I guess, as well, and have some concerns about it. I am supportive of putting this forward for the whole board to discuss and vote on. And whether it's or as amended. So just wanted to let you know.
Great. Pardon me, just 1 second. I got to get back. Get my technology here. All right. First of all, are there any no vote? Oh, excuse me, Director Sloan. You're muted.
I would like to propose an minor amendment that I think might take care of your concerns about Bike to Work Day. And that is delete 2023 and every year thereafter from the language of the resolution. And I think that satisfies your concern about all the people putting energy into Bike to Work Day. And it satisfies my concern that we are an elected board right now, and this seems to be committing every elected board in perpetuity to defining this as Ride with Pride Day. And there might be other conditions that come up.
Thank you.
So yeah, that's my motion.
Okay. We have a motion to delete the language 2023 and every year thereafter. Do we have a second for that motion?
I'll second that.
Okay, good. Thank you. Director Catlin seconds the motion. I see Director Ruscia and Mr. Kroll both have their hands up. I'm going to ask, before we go back to you, Joanne, I'm going to just ask if Jack has something procedural we should be looking at.
Yeah, the only thing I would say is there was an amendment on the table initially to adopt the language as circulated, and I just want to make sure you approve that before you take the additional amendment from Director Stone.
Okay.
So you only want to consider one thing at a time, and then the second thing I'll mention is, just for information purposes, is Bike to Work Day is always on the 4th Wednesday of June.
Right. It's just an issue this year.
It would be an issue this year, and potentially, I'm not going to get the math exactly right. Once every 7-8-ish years, it would be coincident again. Yeah.
Okay. Director Ruscia, if your comment is about this amendment, I'm going to go back first and take the vote on Director Deschel's amendment. Okay. So the amendment to the essentially limited the recommended action to Ride with Pride Day and does not address the district is on the table, on the floor. Do we have, just got an interesting text I'll tell you about in a minute. Do we have any no votes on that amendment? Okay, that amendment passes with 4 yes votes and 0 no votes and 0 abstentions. Now, do we need to take the amendment again? All right. Can you state your amendment, please, Secretary Sloan?
Yes, I would recommend deleting the year 2024 and every year thereafter from the proposed resolution.
And we have a second from Director Catlin.
Yes.
Great. Thank you. Director Rusha.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So the proposal, Secretary Sloan said the year 2024, but I think she meant 2023
2022.
in that bullet.
Right.
And but I guess I just wanted clarification. So we're still I just want to understand from the amendment proposal and also from you, Madam Chair. Is it removing an annual designation, or is it just cleaning up the language?
You know, I don't have the language right in front of me, but I think we are making the designation, the proclamation, you know, if somebody else wants to look at it, Ms. Snyder, if you see it or whatever, but I think we're making the proclamation. We're just not stating, you know, I assume that this proclamation would move forward, and we've asked the board to ask the staff to apprise the board about 2024. So I think that it would move us forward, just not naming 2023 or thereafter. Anybody disagree with that?
I just don't understand. Right, sorry.
Did you have more, Director Rusha?
Oh, sorry, I wasn't sure if I could speak. If I could speak, I still have confusion. Is this amendment to change the intent of having an annual designation, so every June 28th, or like, is that the intent of? I guess I want to understand what the intent of the amendment is, because if the intent is to remove the annual designation, right, then we would have, I mean, I think in effect we would have Ride with Pride, depending on how you interpret it, maybe this year, definitely next year, but then the board would have to come back and do this any year following, right, if we don't have that annual designation. And so I don't understand what the intent is. And if I may, you know, I appreciate where Secretary Sloan said, you know, we're doing something that a future board would have to adhere to. Well, that's true. A future board can always change it, right? Like this current board enacts policies from resolutions of previous boards on pretty major issues. And in fact, our strategic plan, because it's a 5-year plan, you know, was done by a previous board, and the current iteration of this board will not be able to affect that. So I think that, I mean, I respect where that perspective is coming from, but it is sort of part and parcel of being like a rolling legislative body.
Let me, oh, excuse me.
Sorry, yeah, but I guess I don't understand the intent of the amendment.
Let me see if I can ask Ms. Snyder to help here. If we take the date out, so it just is a proclamation of Ride with Pride Day, and then we ask for them to apprise us what they're doing in 2024. Does it change really? I mean, it seems like we have proclaimed it, and it's not limited to just 2024. Is that how you would read it, or I don't have it in front of me, as I said.
Yes, Chair, that's how I would read it as well.
It would continue. It's okay. Does that satisfy your concern, Director Rusha?
Yes.
Okay.
That's fine.
Director Deschelle?
Yeah, I think once we finish this amendment, I will have another amendment, which is to, in that second bullet, change just make it so that second bullet is an annual commitment, right? So so that it reads, well, I'll do it after.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Do we have any no votes? Okay, we have 4 yes votes, 0 no votes. The amendment passes and we will be removing that language. Director DeShell.
Yes, I move to amend the second bullet so that it reads, each year, RTD staff working under the guidance of General Manager and CEO shall apprise the Board of Directors of its vision for that year's Ride with Pride Day and any related Pride Month initiatives no later than March 1st of each year. This information may include, but should not be limited to, projects that require board authorization.
Is there a second? I guess we're just requiring it for next year, but certainly we could require, I mean, I think what y'all are wanting is still happening here, which is that this is moving forward, it's being proclaimed. And you know,
I
whether
don't
we
mind bringing it for the whole board to discuss.
I'm sorry.
I don't mind bringing the same amendment for the whole board to discuss.
Okay, that's fine. Vice Chair Catlin.
Thank you. It seems to me that if we proclaim June 28th as Ride with Pride Day, that it would take some sort of an action in a subsequent year or a subsequent board to negate that. So it just seems to me that if we just leave it at that unless there's some sort of action taken by this board or a future board in a year or two, that it would just stand as being Ride with Pride Day. Am I
Okay.
wrong? I don't know.
I think that's what Ms. Snyder agreed with. So thank you. Ms. Sloan.
Right. I would say that is the intent. And it concerns me that Director Rusha is confused about this because we discussed it at length last night. You know, I don't, you know, there's just something about the language and every year thereafter that gives me heartburn. And I think you get the same result by taking off the year. And I mean, it's just like, when is Mother's Day? It's an annual event, but it doesn't require staff to do something every year. And it doesn't, and I have no problem with this continuing for as long as it's meaningful. I don't want to take it away. The intent was to keep it, but just remove that kind of troublesome language.
Okay. Great. Director Rusha.
Hi, thank you, Madam Chair. I apologize for causing concern. I was just making sure that this amendment didn't functionally change the proposal. I think it's fine, and I don't have any objection in case that wasn't clear before. I was just making sure.
Okay.
And
go ahead.
Well, I'm sorry because I'm not trying to take the chair's role. So, but I guess I would just say that, you know, perhaps it would be beneficial if our GM CEO weighed in if she had any thoughts to what we have been discussing, any additional thoughts since this amendment has come up.
Madam Chair, I defer to you if you'd like me to.
Sure.
Yeah, so thank you very much, Director Rusha and Chair Geisinger. So from staff's perspective, we do things annually anyway. And so recognizing that you want to memorialize this, as I said before during my previous comments, I think to the fact that is reoccurring each year, just as we have Hispanic History Month, we have Autism Awareness Month, Domestic Violence Month, things of the like, and a multitude of others. We traditionally do something to acknowledge, and I know we're trying to memorialize this here. So regardless of the date or what have you, staff will continue to do what we typically do in reference to being an inclusive organization, embracing the notion behind diversity, not just in people, but in thought and experience as it's embedded in our values, of which we collectively agreed upon, that are the ideals and beliefs we hold true for the organization. So I understand both sides of the fence relative to ensuring that we're not taking away, or the perception taking away from Bike to Work Day, but recognizing that June 28th will be the anniversary of Stonewall. Regardless if we put a date on it or not, we are still going to march down that path and support the efforts in reference to what we do from a communications and engagement perspective. So that's what I would offer up. I more so would say that I don't think the date is going to hinder what we do collectively, and I understand the points that have been raised by all, and that we're amenable, because we are still going to do what we do, and that's make lives better through connection with being an inclusive organization. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have anything else, Director Rusha? Director Deschel?
Yeah, I would just say I'm a little bit disappointed, frankly, in the executive committee. I found that sort of the discussions around this, similar to discussions around equity issues, we choose to hide behind, oh, well, I don't want to bind future boards when it's something that's related to equity. We try to say that our strategic priority, how important equity is, but then when push comes to shove, a lot of times the actions of board members show sort of trying to water things down, not willing to fully commit and stand in that truth and really push to be an equitable organization, to have those types of actions, right? And marking a day is one thing, taking the action is another, but it is just, I'm glad to see this is going to go to the full board, but I did just want to express my disappointment of how we talk about and treat equity-based proposals that come to this board versus how we treat other proposals, and which procedural things we choose to hide behind or choose as reasons to try to water something. That's all.
All right, I'm just going to take a second to respond, because I guess I disagree. I think that's a bit unfair. I think that we have pushed this forward. We've pushed this forward with the amendment that y'all came to us with. And we have created a proclamation that does not have specific dates, but essentially has the same effect. It's a long-term proclamation. And so I think that I don't see that complaint, but I'll leave it at that. Director Tisdale. No, you're muted, Director Tisdale. Still muted. You're still muted. We can't hear you.
There we go. Now you can hear me, right?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to second the expressions by the chair relative to the response to Director Deschel. I think that's very appropriate, because I might also say there are lots of things that we do only on an annual basis. The first one that comes to mind, of course, is the budget. We don't intend to, nor can we, bind future boards relative to expenditures. So I think it's appropriate that we treat it this way. I'm very much in favor of having a discussion. I think there's a lot of merit to this. And I appreciate the discussion, because I think it will give us the opportunity to share with the public and with the other board members who may not have had an opportunity to look into this as much as I know the three presenting directors have, and the executive committee, to learn more about it. So I appreciate that. But I think in response, there are lots of things that we only do on an annual basis as we attempt to govern. Thank you very much. That's all, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. All right. We have passed the amendments, I believe. Are we set on this issue, Mr. Kroll or Ms. Snyder?
I think the only thing that's left is to basically you started with a motion here to consider it. You've amended that. There was a failed second motion that didn't get, or a second motion to amend that wasn't, or that was approved. So we're done with that. Now there's been a second motion, or a third motion to amend that did not receive a second. So you're back to your original motion, which is to send this to the board for approval at the June meeting.
Okay.
And so you need to just vote for that, and then we'll add it to the agenda if it is so approved.
All right. Are there any no votes on that motion? All right. Seeing none, there are yet 4 yes votes, 0 no votes. The motion as amended is approved to be sent to the board for and on the agenda. All right. Great. The next item on our agenda is approval of the June board agenda for the board meeting on June 27th. And I'm going to take a motion on this and a second, and then I have a couple comments about what's on the agenda. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Okay, I hear Director Catlin and Director Sloan as the second. I would just point out one item. There is a flag presentation for number 5, a flag presentation for Chief Fitzgerald. I think some of you know about this, I'm not sure. But Lee Kemp, who was a former chair of the board, worked with Senator Bennett's office and had the federal flag flown over the U.S. Capitol. And I think somebody related with him had a state flag flown over the state Capitol that are, he has asked if he could present those to Chief Fitzgerald during the board meeting in honor of his and in memory of his son as a fallen police officer. I know that Ms. Johnson and Chief Fitzgerald were all good with it. I'm good with it. I think, does anybody have any concerns with that? I guess is my question. Okay. And I think the code of conduct does not come up separately here. I know, Ms. Rusha, are you still here? Okay, well, this is an issue for the board then. I think she wants to move to amend to consider the code of conduct and suspension policy as separate recommended actions. I think that is appropriate in the board meeting, and she's not here to discuss it anyhow. So we won't move forward on that. Director Deschel, do you have comments on this motion?
Yeah, I was just going to move to separate those out.
Okay.
As separate items.
I'm fine with entertaining it. I sort of felt like that made more sense to leave to the whole board, but is that what you're thinking, Ms. Snyder?
I think so, because Chair, technically this was deferred by this committee to the board meeting. So I think the board meeting is the proper place to offer that amendment to sever the two.
Are you okay with that?
Yeah, just for procedurally, would we do that at the top of the meeting or once we get to the item itself?
I assume it can get to the item, but others weigh in.
That's what I would recommend. Is
Okay.
you get to the item, you take the motion to consider the item at the board meeting, and then you move to separate it.
For separate recommended actions. Okay. Is that good, Director Deschel? Okay. Secretary Sloan?
Yes, I'm not sure a motion is necessary for this because this is something at the chair's discretion, but this would seem an appropriate meeting for the employee appreciation statement because we are recognizing retirees. I saw that somewhere, that we're recognizing retirees, but maybe not. Yes, we are. So it seems like at the beginning of the meeting, following the land acknowledgement, that would be possibly appropriate for this meeting. That's
Okay.
all.
I think that makes sense. And that statement has gone through this committee as well, right? Yeah. Okay.
And the board.
And the board, right. Director Deschel.
Yeah, just want to confirm that 17, 18, D is going to be revised to reflect the amendments that we just went through in
Yeah.
the published agenda.
That's
I don't
correct.
know if I need to separately. No, great.
Yep, that will be revised. And Mr. Kroll, or those in the board office, can we please add in the employee appreciation statement, maybe after the land acknowledgement?
Certainly.
Okay, great. Let's see. All right. We have several discussion items. Monthly government relations report. Actually, I'm going to stop for just a
Pardon me,
second.
Chair. Pardon, you had a motion and a second. You just need a vote on to approve the agenda.
Okay, sorry about that.
That's
Are
okay.
there any no votes on approval of the agenda? All right, with 4 votes in favor and 0 no votes, the agenda is approved as amended. And I know that Ms. Johnson just got this notice, or may have gotten it before me, but we just got a notice that the application for $25 million for Highway 119 BRT from U.S. Department of Transportation, which was a joint, you could describe this better than I could, Ms. Johnson. There was a joint, I think Boulder County was the lead on it, but CDOT and RTD were all in support. It was fully granted. The $25 million essentially finishes out what we need to do 119, which is great. Ms. Johnson.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Chair. Just for everybody's edification, was a collective joint application that was submitted through the RAISE grant process, in which it was submitted under the auspices of CDOT and or Boulder County this time, excuse me, for $25 million. So yes, just received that notification from Congressman Nagusa's office earlier this morning, and then there was subsequent notification as well. So that's hot off the press, and the senator's office will be disseminating a press advisory.
Yeah, it's great news. Thank you. We are at the monthly government relations report for June 2023. Michael Davies, I believe you are up.
Yes, thank you, Chair and members of the board. Michael Davies, Government Relations Officer. Really this month, running through our federal, state, and local matters. The action really is at the federal level for once. And so with the completion of the debt ceiling negotiations last month, that really has allowed the Appropriations Committee to start moving forward with the annual appropriations process. As you all may know, RTD certainly tracks and relies on the annual appropriations process to ensure that funding is appropriated. You have your authorized funding that gets authorized in, say, the bipartisan infrastructure law, but it takes the annual appropriations process to move that forward on an annual basis. Wish I had better news for the Transportation, Housing, and Urban Development Subcommittee numbers, and that really is looking, nothing out of the Senate has come out of the Senate yet. The House has published their subcommittee numbers this year, and they are listing a 25.3% cut to the transportation budget. That's roughly about $22 billion less than last year's funding. And that is far below the authorized levels of the bipartisan infrastructure law. I think, as discussed with this committee before, we knew there would be some changes as a result of the 2022 election. And we're starting to see those changes play out in the legislative process with the Appropriations Committee. It is not just the Transportation, Housing, and Urban Development Subcommittee that is receiving cuts. There is cuts largely across the board between 30, 25%, 35%. The largest cut is to the Financial Services Subcommittee of 59% cut. Only 3 subcommittees saw an increase. That is the Defense, Homeland Security, and Military Construction Veterans Affairs Subcommittee. Those were the only 3 that saw an increase. So it really is the desire of House leadership to do some financial cutting in the annual appropriations process. That is largely seen as a starting negotiation point with the Senate, and in many ways lines up a disagreement between Senate leadership and House leadership that will play itself out toward the end of the fiscal year, which is September 30th. So RTD will be tracking that closely. No legislative language or committee markup has been scheduled yet for the Transportation, Housing, Urban Development Subcommittee. And they often post no more than about a day, 2 days before the committee markup the actual legislation. And so at that time, we'll be able to see that legislation and analyze where those cuts come from. And at that time, we'll of course communicate that to the board. And that really is the news at the federal level. Moving over to state, with the legislative session wrapping up on May 8th, there is little to report in regards to state legislation. RTD is, of course, working with the state legislature on their upcoming Transportation Legislation Review Committee hearings. Those committee hearings will start later this summer, and RTD will go forward with its regularly scheduled report to the Transportation Legislation Review Committee in the fall later this year. And then finally, just as a note to the board, RTD did finalize the grant agreement with the Colorado Energy Office for the Zero Fare Better Air program. That amount was $13.8 million that is to be reimbursed upon completion of the Zero Fare program. And that really is all of the available state funding that was allotted to RTD through the state grant program. And then just at the local level, wanted to note that we have continued to do our proactive outreach to cities and counties. And on June 6th, this happened both on the same day, directors and staff participated in updates to the City of Thornton City Council and Golden City Council. And lastly, also not included in the report, just this week on Tuesday, General Manager Johnson was presented a proclamation in support of RTD's Zero Fare for Youth by the Denver City Council. And with that, that concludes my report, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Davies. Director Sloan.
Right, this is not a comment, but it's something I feel like I should share with the executive committee. At the most recent Metro Mayor's Caucus meeting, one mayor stated that Denver really doesn't have a transit system. And Mr. Davies gave a data-backed and very eloquent response to the inaccuracy of that statement. And it had a big effect on the caucus. And I really appreciate his stepping up and looking up all the facts and figures about other metro systems that this mayor commented on were better than ours. So it was a great moment. I was glad to be there for it.
That's great. I'm glad you raised it. I had not heard that. And thanks so much, Mr. Davies. It sounds like you handled that well. So great. Any other comments or questions? All righty. I'm going to skip the next discussion items, updates to board operating guidelines, skip over that for just a minute, and we'll discuss it down below. Public comment responses. I think I've heard from several people, and I have felt that we get comments in our public comment, and we take the stand that we don't reply to those. I think Ms. Johnson has I've tried to at least softly reply to those recently, and I think Ms. Johnson has sometimes addressed them in her statement. And we talked about that by the way people can register, staff can get back to them. We don't want to commit staff to getting back to everyone on every comment. Ms. Johnson, do you want to address that at all?
Thank you very much, Chair Geisinger. Just for everyone's edification, yes, to the point that Chair Geisinger raised that, there's awkward feelings relative to members of your constituency taking time out to bring forth public comments, but recognizing public comment is just that, public comment, due to the fact that we would be limiting public participation because these items, should they be discussed, weren't agendized. So not everybody has ample opportunity to be present relative to engaging on certain topics. So what I had suggested to the chair in reference to past experiences in which I've had at different public agencies that receive public comments, that statements can be made relative to when somebody puts forward their desire to speak. We ask them would they like to be contacted, and there could be staff follow-up that's done through the office of the board. And if in fact there's additional information that's warranted, because I think it would behoove us all to recognize that we do have a customer relation management system that we have here. And if we could then ensure that we are placing these individuals' names in such a way that we can track that, it would be helpful, because oftentimes you all receive different communique in disparate fashions. It's gone to me, it's gone to somebody else within the organization. And we want to ensure that we're being consistent in addressing the customer constituents' concerns, comments, or questions as appropriate. So with that as a backdrop, I believe I mentioned this to Mr. Kroll in a brief conversation. We haven't had an opportunity to delve deeper, but in relationship to having somebody register, and if they say that they would like to be contacted, then the board office could coordinate accordingly and coordinate with members of my team or with me directly. So I think that's the best manner going forward. So thank you very much for the opportunity to provide that information, Chair Geisinger.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Mr. Kroll.
Yes, happy to coordinate responses and follow up. I think it's a very reasonable request of the board office. I will offer that there's been some conversation recently around directors wanting to do additional follow-up with members who provide comment or write in letters to the board. And so that will just be something, I think, Chair Geisinger, that we can talk a little bit more about around how we want to handle that. I might recommend, a system by which the chair responds on behalf of the board or something like that, and that individual directors may follow up as they best see fit. So we can talk more about that, but there has been a request made by a director for contact information, and I think that relates to another item on our agenda here. So Melanie Snyder, General Counsel Snyder, and I have been discussing some of the merits of those requests recently as well.
Great, thank you. I think that's our next item on the agenda, which is the director request for documents and the Colorado Open Records Act. I will also get into the board operating guidelines a little bit after we discuss this. And I know that Ms. Snyder and I have had conversations, and Jack and Kroll and Ms. Snyder, and so we've all been kind of discussing this. Melanie, do you want to start this off?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So I think this came up most recently at a board meeting in response to one of the director's requests for a number of contracts that are related to our Access on Demand contract. And I just want to be clear, of course, staff is here to support the directors and ensure that you all get the information you're requesting, you get the records that you're requesting, and you get it in a timely fashion. So what has been happening historically, and I did confirm this with John McKay that the practice was similar when he was in the board office, is that when directors request for records, board staff would submit a core request through the online portal and just set up a request that way. That is the fastest way to get to ensure that all records are compiled and then any necessary redactions are made. So for example, of any confidential or proprietary information or safety sensitive information. And that is not to say that a director couldn't get that information. You're certainly welcome to come in and review unredacted versions of contracts. It's just to ensure protection and that we're meeting RTD's obligations to not disclose confidential information. So that's the process that was happening historically. I did confirm that there were many requests that John McCabe processed on behalf of former directors. And then we also, as an alternative, directors are also welcome if they want to submit a core request. And we have other directors that have done that historically. So both of those avenues are available. I think going through board staff is the fastest way to ensure you're going to get the records you need. And really all this is happening sort of behind the scenes very quickly. And I think unless there's any questions, I'll just leave it there.
Great. I think, well, first of all, I'll ask for other comments or questions, and then I'll add a little bit. Director Deschel.
Yeah, just so procedurally, is it, if we have a request, can we just CC the board office on the initial email, and you guys will then know to process it, or do we need to send you guys a separate email that says, please file a quorum request?
No, I just ask that you include the board office in every request, and frankly, you know, there is probably a best practice here that we could move towards, which is the request, you know, comes to the board office directly, and then the board office runs the point along with, you know, the administration on how to funnel that down correctly to the appropriate parts of the administration. And I'll just give an example. Recently, you know, without providing too many specifics, but we had a request go to someone in the organization, and information was provided, and then a request that came through the board office that was then funneled, you know, more correctly through the organization, and more accurate information was provided. And so if we're not aware of what's out there, we can't help meet the needs of the board or individual directors. And we can also this way work with CEO Johnson and her team to ensure that the most accurate information is provided, and it's provided consistently, so that directors aren't necessarily getting information when they ask this person, but not getting information when they ask this person. So that's what I have to add. Thank you.
Anything else, Director Deschel? Okay, Ms. Johnson.
Yes, thank you so much for the question, Director Deschel, and thank you, Chair Glassinger, for the opportunity to speak. And I just want to put a finer point on what Mr. Kroll said. It's something that I have shared constantly as we go forward. We really need to leverage the board office, because oftentimes there could be a request that comes in and goes to somebody in, you know, middle management within the organization. And of course, they're going to run it through the food chain. I'm getting something directly from this director, and we had a circumstance where it wasn't the appropriate person. And so that creates a little angst and trepidation amongst staff unnecessarily. And so I would reiterate that as we have this opportunity, and Mr. Cole being in space with his team members, that we remember that. And I know oftentimes people will send things to me, but we can do it in such a way where we have Mr. McKay in my office that could be, you know, working in tandem with Mr. Kroll's office, recognizing the familiarity there. And this could be a lot more expeditious, and we won't have, you know, members of the board that are disgruntled or dissatisfied with the response time if in fact we do it in this manner. So what we'll try to endeavor to do is work on those protocols so it's clearly understood by all parties, because we want to ensure that you have the information to do your to carry out your duties accordingly to represent those in your districts. Thank you.
Great. That was really what I was going to say, is I think, you know, we're getting a lot of questions from a lot of different people, and they're going to various places in the organization. I know that the board office is really committed to taking those questions, keeping the director in the loop, getting the answers, and bringing them back to the director without having a lot of different people addressing that. And I would say too, you know, some of those questions and requests raise, well, I think those questions often raise good issues, but we need to think about how we manage them. I think this is one piece of them, without taking up too much of staff's time from their work. And we are going to be looking at the board operating guidelines. There's a requirement that we should be reviewing them every year in the first quarter, which we have not done. But Jack has offered to work on that. I'll help him. If there's anyone else that can help, you know, as he goes through the process, that would be great. I know Director Sloan, you've looked at them some, so you might have some ideas. So all requests should go to the board office. I think I've also asked Jack to go ahead and schedule the rest of the onboarding. I know that the office, Ms. Parrish has a list of onboarding topics. Let's get those addressed so people, you know, some things came up in other matters in the finance committee the other night. I think that finishing some of that around our real estate options and things like that can help with those questions from board members. And, you know, one thing we may want to look at in terms of those sorts of questions and how moving forward is looking at longer term work plans for our committees. But that's a conversation that's still in progress, and that's not one we need to engage with Ms. Johnson and others. So, as we look at the board operating guidelines, we'll be looking at those things. There are also 2 resolutions that have been passed by this board in 1986 and 1996 that essentially say that it says that a board member should not use more than 4 hours of a staff person's time on a particular subject. I don't know if that's relevant here, but we'll look at that in terms of the board operating guidelines as well, and see if that is something we need to move forward on or just reiterate. So I think everybody is committed to getting people the information they need, and also committed to trying to streamline it so staff is not spending inordinate amounts of time, and we're not getting to all different people throughout the agency. Any comments? I'd love your comments now, later, other board members' comments on how we move these things forward. Okay. I think our last discussion item.
Madam Chair, if I may, just a point of clarification.
Yep.
So
Yes.
recognizing that conversations did ensue in the Finance and Planning Committee, and the chair of said committee, who is no longer with us right now, indicated staff would respond. I'm going to be very transparent, recognizing that a lot of those requests don't even fall within the enabling legislation of the Regional Transportation District. And so recognizing a statement was made, I do not want the appearance as if staff isn't being responsive to those requests. Because more so there was a lot of angst relative to members of my team hearing those requests that were made. There are certain policies that the board has acted on relative to what it is that we can do, and when conversations ensued relative to us utilizing, assets that were procured in a way in which we do not have autonomy over disposing of, to create housing and things of the like, I do believe that there's an expectation that staff is going to respond in some way, and I just want that to be clear relative to where we're standing with staff, recognizing that we're trying to ensure that we can keep our transit agency in a state of repair and a myriad of other things that are going down the pike. I just wanted to ensure that perhaps, and we can talk offline, but that is made known because we pride ourselves on being very responsive to board requests, and traditionally we provide memoranda and things of the like, but I have ensured with my team that they are not supposed to do anything at this juncture because it wasn't clear in reference to any direction that was provided. So thank you for the opportunity to just share that in this forum.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I think that's important. And I think that's what we were thinking about in terms of let's get finish the onboarding process so some of the people have a better understanding of those things. But I think that's right. Those are not matters that I think staff should be responding to at this point. Vice Chair Catlin.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, GM CEO Johnson. I was frustrated after that Finance and Planning Committee meeting that it was almost inferred that staff would look into things that I did not believe were, as you said, in the enabling legislation, but just really, I think we as board members need to look at everything through the lens of, are we providing public transportation and transit? And I think some of those things were a big distraction, and we have so much we need to do to shore up this agency and providing our core services. And some of these things, in my view, were unnecessary distractions. Thank you.
Thank you. Jack.
I just add, given these concerns, something that I've talked, albeit briefly, with CEO Johnson about, as well as John McKay on her team, and I've talked with you, Chair Geisinger, and Director Davidson about, is creating annual committee work plans. And we know, the administration knows that there are certain things that have to come forward at certain meetings, the thrice annual service changes. We know when those are coming. But in the budget, we know the process that takes. But this will help provide structure to these one-off requests that are rather large, where the committee chairs would have, in theory, discretion to say, okay, we can take that matter up if it's of great interest to the committee, but realistically, given our work plan here, we're not going to be able to consider that until this time in the future. And so having committee work plans would be one way to help manage these types of requests and funnel them in a way that allows the district to meet its current needs and also meet the needs of directors, desire for more information on certain topics.
Thank you. I agree. I agree with all the comments. And, I think that one example that came out of our retreat was the importance of sustainability and the desire to have a sustainability plan. We've got staff right now that are focused on this transition plan. They've got work plans. They've got their own goals and KPIs. But some of those issues that were raised in the other matters the other night are something that might be worth raising at that point. Having a sustainability plan on a schedule at some point in the future, if not right now, but at some point would give people a place to say, oh, this is when it's going to be discussed. So it's just a concrete example that we can discuss. Anything else on this? I think it's a discussion that we'll need to have with the full board as well. All right, the final discussion item is reinstatement of full board meeting dinners. I asked that this put on here, and for two reasons. I think I know that many of you or some of you have not been here when we've had board meeting dinners, but it really, to be able to grab something to eat and sit in the conference room upstairs for 30 minutes with our colleagues, I think is a nice way to develop relationships, to get to know people, to develop that collegiality that makes us work better as a board. And I also think people are coming from jobs and meetings and other things and going into meetings that sometimes can last a long time. And now we're not having any food in the meeting room. So I think it's important to feed people and not have them thinking, how soon can I get home to dinner? So I have asked that we do this. There's a process, as I understand it, in place. Mr. Kroll could explain that more, but I think that the proposal is that we would have certain vendors and people could choose. We could start off, we never chose before, but we could start off with I guess that's the plan, choosing certain items, and then the charge, for those who eat, there would be the charge against their local budget. I know that there are some who think that this is not a good use of taxpayer money for the minor, tiny amount of money that it is, something $15, $16 a meeting with 5 meetings left to go this year. I think it's a very good use of taxpayer money. So that's why I've requested putting it on here. Can you please let me know if you agree here or if you have comments or disagree? Or Bobby.
Yeah, thanks. I just don't think it's a good use of taxpayer money. I think it's one thing, right, to pass the hat and say, hey, if we want to kick in funds to have dinner together, that's awesome. If not, no worries. I just to use, right, because inevitably what will happen, right, is that the local budget will be small, right, and then people will say, oh, I need more local budget in order to do X, Y, or Z, right, and the local budget piece, just depending on how it's used, can also have some challenges. So I don't think we should be using taxpayer dollars. That said, I don't mind being in the minority on things like this. So I just don't feel great about using that money to feed ourselves when we can feed ourselves. And then you get into, oh, well, if I'm taking the meeting remote, do I get reimbursement for dinner?
No.
I'm out of town. So it's only when right? Like there's just all those issues where to me it's just a lot simpler to say, let's just not do it. But I get that some people want that to be there. I think also, frankly, personally, I can't take another half an hour to sit and eat. especially that early in the workday. And I know that for other people who work full time, they feel like there's this obligation to be there, as early as 5 or 4:30 is hard. And so I'm opposed to it, but can understand why other people would be in favor of it. So.
Okay, thanks. Secretary Sloan.
Yes, I don't see this as anything but an investment in board relations. And it's a cross-cultural tradition to break bread together and talk together. And just this very meeting has an example why I should be speaking more to Director Deschel if he can be there. There's a lot to unpack, and his feelings that we're limiting the board's commitment to equity. I don't agree with it, but I understand, I need to hear his viewpoint. And the board meeting itself is not the opportunity for that. It's the more informal interactions before the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. First Vice Chair Catlin.
Thank you. Looking back several years, when I first got on the board, the meals were had in the boardroom itself. And so we found ourselves eating in front of our constituents. And then they moved it upstairs, which I think was a much better way to handle it. But keep in mind that we had meals for every committee meeting and board meetings. So it was a weekly occurrence. And we're talking about 12 times a year here. I would also like to point out that CDOT's commission, who meets on a monthly basis, are provided meals the day of their commission meeting and the day of their committee meetings. So it's not uncommon for elected bodies to, or even boards and commissions to have that breaking bread, as Director Sloan so aptly put it. So I'm in favor of it, although if the board decides it's not a good use of taxpayer money, I would certainly yield to that. It's not something I would fall on my sword for, but I appreciate the consideration, but just did want to remind everybody that we did a lot more of this several years ago.
Thank you. Mr. Crowell.
Well, thank you, Chair Geisinger. It sounds like we have some consensus here and can move forward for this month. I will say the process will look different. There are some procedural things and some plans that we need to follow, just given the realities of our situation with this. So we are working, just as an update, we are working to identify a caterer that can accommodate some needs that we have for ordering dinner. If we can get that all worked out in the next day or two, we would be contacting directors, hopefully by the end of this week, with requests to have their orders, if they would like to order anything for dinner, into us by noon on Monday. And so this is a first go at reintroducing these things, and it will get better over time. So we just ask for some patience, and we're doing all that we can from a board office perspective. Taishere just got back from vacation. She was out for quite some time, and this is, priority number one for her to get on. But there are some further constraints that we have this go around that we didn't have in the past that we're needing to work through. But we should be in a position to have meals for next week. And if that changes, we'll let you know.
Thank you very much. Thank you all. I apologize. This meeting has gone a bit long. Are there any other matters to discuss? Seeing none.
Should note that the meals is not the reason that I'm going to be attending my first board meeting in person this month.
We'll be happy to have you back. So, all right. Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Great. The meeting is adjourned as of 1:20 p.m. Thank you for joining us. Have a good day.